Welcome to Korean History Channel Behind Palace Walls. This video is a non-fiction content reconstructed based on historical facts and events. Some scenes may have been dramatized to aid viewer understanding.
The Last Night of Yeonsangun, a 12-hour chronicle of the Jungjong restoration, the night of September 1st, 1506. Inside Changdeokgung Palace, the banquet was still in full swing. King Yeonsangun was drinking and reveling with his newly selected concubines. He had no idea that at that very moment, hundreds of soldiers were sharpening their swords in the darkness outside the palace walls. And just a few hours later, an unprecedented event would unfold. For the first time in Joseon history, a king would be forcibly removed from power by his own ministers. This was no simple coup d'etat. This was the most meticulously planned and swiftly executed political upheaval in the 500-year history of the Joseon Dynasty, carried out entirely by the minister's own hands. Today we tell you the story of that night of the Jungjong restoration, the untold 12 hours that never made it into the history books. August 1506. The atmosphere in Hanyang was at its worst. Yeonsangun's tyranny had already exceeded all imagination. Bloody purges beginning with the literati purge of 1498 and continuing through the purge of 1504. Officials sent throughout the nation to forcibly conscript beautiful women. The demolition of civilian homes within 30 li of the capital. The people suffered and the ministers lived in constant fear of death. Left State Councilor Park Won-jong's residence. He had become increasingly cautious recently. Yeonsangun's suspicions were deepening. He never knew when disaster might strike him. But Park Won-jong wasn't simply hiding. He was secretly seeking out like-minded individuals. In mid-August 1506, Park Won-jong met secretly with Seong Hui-an and Yu Sun-jeong. Although historical records don't specify the exact location and circumstances of their meeting, reconstructing the situation suggests they moved with extreme caution. If we continue like this, we'll all die. Park Won-jong's words. This was no exaggeration. Yeonsangun was already executing ministers on the slightest suspicion. Seong Hui-an asked cautiously, "Is there a way?" Park Won-jong pulled out a piece of paper from his robe. Several names were written on it. Surprisingly, the list included a member of the royal family, Prince Jinseong, Yeonsangun's half-brother. "We must enthrone Prince Jinseong as king." Silence fell over the room. This was treason. Success would make them heroes, but failure would mean the extermination of 3 generations of their families. But Seong Hui-an and Yu Sun-jeong nodded. They too were already prepared. Why was Prince Jinseong chosen? He was King Jungjong's second legitimate son, making his bloodline legitimate. Moreover, unlike Yeonsangun, he had a gentle temperament and no lust for power. In Park Won-jong's eyes, this was the greatest qualification. The paradox that those who don't seek power often make the best rulers. The plan proceeded meticulously. Park Won-jong first needed to secure military forces. But there was a problem. The palace guards were all loyal to Yeonsangun. How would they gather troops? Park Won-jong decided to combine his own private soldiers with the military forces of military officials who had suffered under Yeonsangun's tyranny. At that time in Joseon, although officially prohibited, many noble families actually maintained private armies. Park Won-jong united them. He particularly focused on one person, Shin Yun-mu, deputy director of the Military Resources Agency. Shin Yun-mu was a figure who enjoyed Yeonsangun's favor. So why did he join the restoration? Although the veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty don't record the detailed reasons, looking at the circumstances, Shin Yun-mu likely feared Yeonsangun's unpredictable madness as well. Those favored today could be branded traitors and executed tomorrow. This was all too common. When Park Won-jong approached Shin Yun-mu, he agonized. But eventually he decided to join the restoration. He brought the warriors under his command into the movement. In this way, Park Won-jong organized a force of hundreds in less than a month. What's remarkable is that this entire process went completely undetected by Yeonsangun's intelligence network. What was the secret? Each military official moved cautiously, and they didn't fully know who else was participating. Only Park Won-jong and key figures knew the entire plan. At the end of August, Park Won-jong had to persuade one last crucial person, Prince Jinseong himself. The circumstances of meeting Prince Jinseong aren't detailed in historical records, But from his personality, we can imagine how it went. Prince Jinseong wanted a quiet, peaceful life. He had watched closely as his brother Yeonsangun transformed. He knew how power corrupts people. I don't want to become king. This would have been Prince Jinsong's honest feeling. But Park Won-jong didn't back down. Your Highness, even at this moment, innocent people are dying. If your Highness doesn't become king, we will all die, and Joseon will fall. After a long silence, Prince Jinseong nodded, but his eyes were filled with fear. Around that time, Park Won-jong finalized the plan. Originally, they intended to execute the plan when Yeonsangun traveled to the stone wall of Jangdan, but Yeonsangun canceled the trip. To make matters worse, proclamations calling for Yeonsangun's deposition began circulating from the Hanam region all the way to Seoul. There was a risk the plan would be exposed. Park Won-jong made his decision. The date, dawn of September 2nd, just days away. The night of September 1st, 1506. Movement began throughout Hanyang. The appointed people gathered one by one at Hulyeonwon, the training ground. When Park Won-jong arrived, hundreds of soldiers were already assembled. All wore swords and armor. Tonight, we change history. Park Won-jong's brief speech. There was no need for long words, everyone was ready. Past midnight, September 2nd arrived. At dawn, Park Won-jong divided his forces. First, they had to eliminate Yeonsangun's closest associates, Im Se-hong and the Shin brothers. Im Se-hong had played a crucial role in instigating the purge of 1504. Shin Su-geun was Yeonsangun's brother-in-law, wielding tremendous power. Park Won-jong sent men to summon them from their homes. The pretext was an urgent summons from the palace. When Im Se-hong emerged from his residence, rebel forces surrounded him. It happened in an instant. Im Se-hong was executed on the spot. Shin Su-geun and his brothers, Shin Su-geum and Shin Su-jeong, were eliminated in the same manner. Shin Su-geun was killed at Sugak Bridge. Historical records clearly document the deaths of these four men. This was the first stage of the rebels' carefully planned operation. After eliminating the key associates, the rebel forces headed for Changdeokgung Palace. At dawn, the attack began. The palace guards raised their spears in shock. "Who goes there?" But instead of answering, the rebels quickly subdued them. Remarkably, the guards offered little resistance. This was proof that public sentiment had already abandoned Yeonsangun. When the gates opened, soldiers poured into the palace. What was happening inside the palace at that moment? Yeonsangun was asleep in his chambers, drunk. Concubines were by his side. Suddenly, shouts came from outside. "Seize the traitor Yeonsangun!" Yeonsangun bolted upright. With drunken eyes, he looked around. He couldn't understand what was happening. A eunuch burst through the chamber doors. "Your Majesty, it's a rebellion. Park Won-jong has led troops into the palace." Yeonsangun's face turned deathly pale. He tried to put on his armor, but drunk as he was, he couldn't manage it properly. "Where are the guards? Summon the guards immediately." But the guards didn't come. They had already knelt before the rebel forces. According to the veritable records, Yeonsangun had told his concubines days earlier, "It has been peaceful for so long, how could there be unexpected troubles? But if something does happen, you will surely not be spared." Yeonsangun himself had sensed the restoration was coming, yet he made no preparations, as if he had given up on everything. Park Won-jong and the rebel forces stood before Yeonsangun. History doesn't record the exact conversation at this moment, but reconstructing the situation, Yeonsangun likely appeared resigned rather than angry. Park Won-jong spoke calmly. "Your Majesty, no, Yeonsangun. You are no longer king. As of now, you have been deposed." Yeonsangun looked incredulous but didn't resist. It was an unprecedented moment, a Joseon king being deposed by his ministers. At dawn, Yeonsangun was dragged from his chambers, not in his royal dragon robes. He had been changed into commoner's clothes. He was no longer a king. The court ladies and eunuchs who watched him being led away trembled with shock and fear. Some wept, others cheered. The rebel forces headed straight for Gyeongbokgung Palace. This was because Queen Dowager Yun, Prince Jinseong's mother, resided at Gyeongbokgung. Park Won-jong and others met with the Queen Dowager and received her permission to depose Yeonsangun and enthrone Prince Jinseong as king. The Queen Dowager gave her tearful consent, and she handed over the royal seal. Prince Jinseong entered Gyeongbokgung Palace. He was still trembling with fear. Park Won-jong took his hand. "Your Highness, you must now become your Majesty." Thus Prince Jinseong became King Jungjong. The sun rose. The people of Hanyang heard the incredible news. Yeonsangun had been deposed and a new king had ascended to the throne. At first, everyone was skeptical, but when the official announcement came from the palace, the people poured into the streets. Remarkably, the people weren't sad. They cheered. "The tyrant is gone. A new king has come." The streets were festive. This was a reaction even the rebel forces hadn't anticipated. Park Won-jong breathed a sigh of relief watching this scene. It was the moment that proved public sentiment had already abandoned Yeonsangun. Chief State Councilor Yu Sun and Right State Councilor Kim Soo-dong and other senior officials also joined the restoration. They had initially observed from the sidelines, joining only when the tide had turned. On September 2nd, Jungjong was enthroned in Gyeongbokgung Hall of Gyeongbokgung Palace. According to the historical records, due to the urgent circumstances immediately following the restoration, Jungjong held his coronation wearing an Ikseongwan wing crown and dragon robe, rather than the full ceremonial regalia. But not everything went smoothly. Immediately after Jungjong's enthronement, ministers memorialized, "Your Majesty, the deposed Yeonsangun's queen, Lady Shin, is the daughter of Shin Su-geun. Since Shin Su-geun was executed as a traitor, his daughter cannot remain in the palace." Jungjong agonized. Lady Shin was his wife, but the minister's pressure was intense. "She is my first wife. What can I do?" When Jungjong hesitated, the ministers pressed harder. "What choice is there considering the greater good of the state?" Ultimately, Jungjong had to depose Queen Shin. This was the tragedy of Queen Jungjong. The first victim of the restoration was an innocent queen. Yeonsangun was exiled to Ganghwa Island. 2 months later, on November 6, 1506, Yeonsangun died at the age of 31. The official record states illness, but the actual cause remains unknown. Some claim it was poisoning. Others say he truly died of disease. History hasn't revealed the truth. After his enthronement, Jungjong first abolished the evil laws from Yeonsangun's era. Laws suppressing free speech, laws promoting extravagance, various taxes that tormented the people, all were abolished. He also restored the honor of those who had died unjustly during Yeonsangun's reign. The Saram scholars who perished in the purges of 1498 and 1504 were rehabilitated. Hanyang gradually regained its peace, but Jungjong himself lived in fear for the rest of his life, the fear that he too could one day be deposed by his ministers. Indeed, throughout his 39-year reign, Jungjong never once treated his ministers forcefully. He was always cautious, always careful. Some historians view this as Jungjong's weakness, but from another perspective, this might have been the greatest achievement of the Jungjong restoration. That even kings cannot wield power arbitrarily. That even kings cannot rule without the consent of their ministers and people. The Jungjong restoration inscribed this into the Joseon Dynasty. More than 500 years have passed since the Jungjong restoration. When we look back on this event today, what should we see? The Jungjong restoration was a righteous resistance against tyranny, but it was also the product of a power struggle. During the restoration, at least 4 people, including Im Sa-hong and the Shin brothers, were executed. Afterward, the restoration merit subjects seized tremendous power, which created new problems. Park Won-jong and other merit subjects became heroes, but they too began to corrupt as they monopolized power. The Sarim faction, led by Jo Gwang-jo, attempted reforms in response, but these were crushed in the literati purge of 1519. History is never simple. It cannot be divided into good and evil. But one thing is certain. What happened at dawn on September 2nd, 1506, at Changdeokgung and Gyeongbokgung Palaces was not simply a change of power. It was an event that posed a fundamental question. How should power be used? Yeonsangun used power for his own desires. As a result, he was driven from the throne. Jungjong tried to use power cautiously for the people. Although he had to watch the merit subjects carefully, he was able to govern the nation stably for 39 years. History tells us this. Power is not eternal. Power can be a blessing or a curse depending on how it is used. The Jungjong restoration was the first time in Joseon history that ministers alone changed the king through their own power. This brought great change to the Joseon Dynasty, the balance between royal authority and ministerial power. This is the greatest legacy the Jungjong restoration left us. That night in 1506, when Park Won-jong gathered with hundreds of soldiers at Hulyeonwon, did he know that they were changing the course of Joseon history? That 500 years later, people would still remember this story. History hasn't ended, and the lessons we must learn from that history haven't ended either. The Jungjong restoration, it was a political upheaval that removed a tyrant, but also an event that makes us think deeply about the nature of power. Thank you for watching. We'll return with more fascinating stories and intriguing topics. Behind Palace Walls, thank you.